A mom in Kentucky was all smiles in her mugshot after her arrest for child endangerment, but the accusations against her are really no laughing matter. What could have led Morgan Chapman to allegedly leave her two young children home by themselves, reportedly for hours? And does the potential punishment fit the alleged crime? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Pikeville, Kentucky is a very small town in eastern Kentucky. It's near the borders of Virginia and West Virginia. It has an estimated population of only about 7,000 people. This is according to the latest census data. But it is sure getting a lot of attention right now, and it's all because of a mugshot that has gone absolutely viral. We're talking about 23-year-old Morgan Chapman, also known as Morgan Miller, who was arrested on a very serious charge of child endangerment and was booked into the Pike County Detention Center earlier this week. Now, a citation report filed by the Pikeville Police Department kind of gives us details about what officers say happened, and this was on September 8th at the Northgate Apartments. We're going to talk about it. I'm not going to do it alone. Let me bring on criminal defense attorney John Day. John, thanks so much for coming on. First of all, before we dig into the details, child endangerment, my understanding that is a Class A misdemeanor in Kentucky. That usually can range for a whole wide range of things, right? Is that more of like a catch-all kind of charge?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It is. In Kentucky, that's a high-level misdemeanor, and a lot of other jurisdictions, this would be considered a felony. But child endangerment is simply you're putting a child in a place where they could get hurt, not necessarily that they did get hurt. So it's a pretty broad, encompassing charge in this case.
And is it usually charged as a standalone charge, or do you usually see it coupled with something else?
Well, it can be. I mean, if it's, a lot of times you see it in cases where someone's picked up for a DUI, DWI, they've got a child in the car. Depending on the jurisdiction, it's a standalone. A lot of states, it's actually a felony. So it's interesting that in Kentucky, that something like this would be a high-level misdemeanor, whereas in other states, you're going to see this charged on the felony level.
Okay, so here's what we seem to know based on the reporting. We go to Monday, September 8th. This is around 9 p.m. And Pikeville police, they respond to this apartment complex for a call about a domestic disturbance. When they go to the apartment, they found two young children, no adults, okay? The report reads, upon arrival, I attempted to make contact with the residents of the apartment. Upon knocking, two very young children opened the door. Upon doing a protective sweep of the apartment, it was discovered that the children were left home alone. After further contact with the children, it was discovered that the children were 4 and 2 years old. John, let me stop right there. Leaving kids that age alone for even a few minutes, putting the law aside, it's a recipe for disaster, very concerning. But in and of itself, is that child endangerment?
Short answer, yes. This is like a strict liability crime. Like, the equivalent in traffic laws would be speeding. You're over the speed limit. You leave a child alone, even for a few minutes, there's really no excuse in the law. It's like, well, I was just going to go to the neighbor's house. I was just going to go. I mean, 4 and 2, they can get into all sorts of situations. So yes, that's a crime in and of itself. Nothing bad has to actually happen to get charged with child endangerment.
By the way, if you have these two young children coming to the door, it might be difficult to understand from them as like witnesses what's going on. How'd this happen, right?
Yeah, and somebody had to make the call. I mean, was this a concerned neighbor, a concerned family member? I mean, somebody noticed that these two little, children were by themselves, and there's a information in the police report that a neighbor said, well, I was asked to watch the kids for a couple minutes, and suddenly a couple minutes turns into X number of hours. So, kids alone, something bad could happen. That's why it's a crime. You just don't do it.
By the way, you talked about a neighbor. So the officers, they actually turned to the neighbors for help to try to understand what was going on. Reading from the report, quote, upon making contact with several surrounding apartments, they all advised they didn't know where the mother was. The neighbor across the hall, Miss Patrick, advised officers that the mother had asked her to watch the children around 5 p.m. on this date. Patrick then advised officers that the mother told her she wanted to, quote, go smoke, and did not want the children around. And then it says go smoke is a common street term for smoking marijuana. John, let's stop there again. So this neighbor now accuses Chapman, saying that she told her to watch the kids. That neighbor, by the way, have a responsibility to make sure the kids are safe, whether she wants to babysit or not. Is there any legal responsibility there?
No, there's not a legal responsibility unless the neighbors said, sure, I'll watch those kids. I can have them in my house. I mean, that's certainly going to be a defense to this charge that this woman is facing. If there's some kind of transaction with the neighbor where the neighbor agrees to take the kids in, that's not what happened here. And you got to believe that some concerned neighbor, whether it's the person in the police report or somebody else in that little community, decided this thing is dangerous. We got to call the police and report what's going on.
You know, we've been on top of the story from the very beginning, and we were able to do that because of the amazing support that we get from our sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm, a firm with over 1,000 attorneys. You know why they're so big? Because they win a lot. They have recovered over $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. Think about that. Now, in the past few months, you have a client in Florida who received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. Out in Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not just start a claim and fight for what you deserve? The thing is, Morgan & Morgan, they make it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC sidebar by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on screen. Based on this narrative, the explanation is definitely not going to help her about why she allegedly wanted to leave. But if it was an emergency, if something was going on, and she's like, I have to run out, I can't get the kids in time, can you just watch them? Does that matter?
I mean, it does matter. It does matter in the context of what was taking place. But telling a neighbor, hey, will you watch these two? Because I got to go smoke. And if you listen to the police report, if you believe what they say, of course, that's slang for smoking marijuana or doing something illicit, something illegal that's not in the best interest of these kids. So if there were a different situation, if some family member was injured and the mom goes to a neighbor and says, just a couple minutes, watch these kids, this is an emergency. But that's not what happened here.
By the way, I didn't even mention what happened next. So as the officers try to figure out the next steps, you know what happens? Chapman comes home. Yeah, quote, the 4-year-old child then told officers her mother's name. While officers were on scene, Chapman arrived. Upon contact, I observed Chapman to have a very strong odor of an alcoholic beverage coming from her person, bloodshot glassy eyes, and thick slurred speech. Chapman then advised officers that she had only left the children downstairs for a couple minutes while she went to a neighbor's house. Now she says she was only gone, 10 minutes, and that she, quote, left them downstairs, which one could assume means left them with the neighbor, but then show back upstairs to the apartment. John, that's odd.
It's like the a DUI equivalent of some driver saying, I only had 2 beers. It's really something that police hear all the time, and it's not certainly truthful the majority of the time. In this case, the mom trying to cover for herself, saying, I was just gone a few minutes. But when you show back up and there are police officers in your apartment asking why your 2 children are left alone, and you smell like a brewery and your eyes are glassy and bloodshot, I mean, it's pretty clear to you put 2 and 2 together to see what's going on. So, the mom leaving the kids, asking the neighbor to watch them, showing up and having the police officers there, this is not going to end well for this mom.
Yeah, by the way, there's also not a whole lot of reliable witnesses. These young children, this allegedly intoxicated mother, this random neighbor. If you are a prosecutor here, how do they prove what actually happened? I feel like you kind of have unreliable narrators in a way.
Well, let's go back to law school. Res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself, right? I mean, we learned that first year of law school. Cops show up, no kids. I mean, no supervisor there, no parent. Mom shows up apparently intoxicated, or at least under the influence. And her statement to a neighbor is, I'm going to go do something illegal, i.e. smoke marijuana. There may not be a lot of reliable witnesses, but circumstantial evidence will certainly win the day if this thing goes to trial.
Does she have a defense?
She has a defense of, I'm just a, dumb person who made a dumb choice involving kids who really could have gotten hurt. Not much of a defense unless there's something to establish that there was a reason she had to leave. I mean, this is not a case that I would want to defend. Of course, if you're her lawyer, you've got to do your best. But what do you say? You say her judgment is poor. She shouldn't have had kids in the first place. I mean, this is a tough one. The facts are pretty straightforward, unless there's something that we don't know about that was not in a police report.
By the way, so after her arrest, she's apparently grinning in this mugshot. She ended up being bonded out. Now it seems her next court date's kind of up in the air. We'll talk about her charges in a second, but I got to ask, I mean, that mugshot, can you explain that? Have you seen anything like that?
Jesse, it's all fun and games until you get charged criminally and social services takes your kid away. I mean, that mugshot speaks volumes about who we're dealing with. I mean, if you think it's cute and funny, you're wearing a prison outfit, looks like an orange and white striped prison garb. The officers at the jail are telling you, okay, we got to photograph you. And you decide this is time to make it like a glamour shoot. That tells you something about who we're dealing with. Obviously, not taking it seriously. Obviously, that mugshot's going to go viral, and people are going to be judging this woman because of the choice not only that she made to leave the kids alone, according to police, but that when she's getting her mugshot taken, she decides to make it humorous, which is totally improper and inappropriate, and tells you something about what's going on in her head.
Um, and by the way, I should say, can that be used at trial against her? Have you seen that? Has a mugshot been used against a defendant to say they don't appreciate the seriousness of their crime? It shows intent. It shows some sort of element of the crime.
Sure, if I were prosecuting this case, I would try to get that in. You want, if it does go to a jury trial, for example, you want the jury to say, obviously, she's not taking any of this seriously. And I would want them to see that if I could get it past the judge, because that mugshot tells us a lot about this situation. Unfortunately, the victims here are these two little kids who didn't have any say in this matter. But if your mom decides that this is the way to deal with getting arrested for endangering you, they're not going to have a great life ahead of them, unfortunately.
Yeah, so child endangerment is a Class A misdemeanor. It's in Kentucky. It carries a maximum punishment of about 1 year in jail. From your understanding, are there any aggravating factors to that? Is it enough to deter someone from doing something like this again?
Yeah, well, look, the lucky thing here is that no kid got hurt. Nobody, grabbed a kitchen knife out of the drawer. Nobody fell down and cracked their head. There was nothing, according to the police report, nothing else happened to the kids. So you got to be grateful for that. But as a standalone crime, again, it's like a strict liability situation. You left these kids alone, something bad could have happened. That's why we have laws against this, to try to encourage people to be a good parent and don't leave your kids alone if you're going to go down the street and smoke marijuana.
Mm. And is there a way, like, if she's convicted of this, or goes to trial, or she takes a deal? Do you think it would be 1 year in jail for something like this?
I mean, it depends on your judge and the circumstance and her history. But again, remember what else is happening here. You're going to have a state social services case against her. Investigators are going to be saying, okay, there's a criminal case, but maybe more importantly, is she someone who needs the intervention of the state government in terms of how she raises her kids? Almost definitely, there's investigators looking at this right now, and there's a process underway where the state's going to say, okay, you need some type of supervision so this doesn't happen again, because the innocent victims here are the 4-year-old and the 2-year-old. And if this is the way the mom thinks it's okay to parent, you can imagine a children's court judge or someone's going to step in and say, okay, we gotta change the way things are here.
But just to be very clear here, this is not an automatic bar to her having custody of her kids again, right?
No, and normally what happens is the state will sort of use a progressive almost like progressive discipline. They'll say, okay, look, what happened? You made a bad choice. You're still the kid's mother. You need to be involved with them, but we need to have someone step in to maybe send you to parenting classes to get you some kind of therapy to deal with looks like a substance abuse problem. So there are a number of factors that are going to step in. She wouldn't automatically lose custody unless somebody determined that there's more to this than we know right now. But state's going to always have a progressive situation where they try to educate the mom, try to make sure the kids are protected from any kind of future bad behavior.
Now, Chapman's ex posted on Facebook that he was getting a lot of questions about her arrest, and he claims that she was hanging out and drinking with her 16-year-old boyfriend. Yeah, talk about that. So in his post, he wrote, and this is the allegation, apparently they had been fighting at the apartment before she left and had the police called for a domestic dispute. When the police showed up, my ex-wife was in a different apartment. My kids didn't even know where she was. My children are now safe and have been placed solely in my care. And the citation report did note that officers had contacted the Kentucky Division of Protection and Permanency. This is the agency in charge of child welfare. That's a complicating factor of this, isn't it, John?
It's a complicating factor, and both the courts and the state protective services are going to be looking at this young mom's judgment, not only the leaving the kids alone, that situation, the substance abuse, but if the partner in your life is a minor, that conceivably in and of itself in some states can bring you more charges depending on the circumstances. So again, questions about this young woman's what's going on in the frontal lobes of her brain, which is where her judgment is formed. She decides to do a glamour shot for her mugshot, and then maybe when she's released from custody, she goes back and hangs out with her 16-year-old boyfriend. A lot of issues here, a lot of red flags, and this one is not over.
And real quick, before we wrap things up, where do you see this going legally in terms of the next steps, the process?
Well, depending on her history, I mean, is she going to be pleading to a misdemeanor? Is there some type of deal worked out? If you're the prosecutor, the main thing you want to do is protect these kids from any kind of future harm. So that may factor into how they resolve the criminal case. As far as things like custody and the intervention of the state, you can imagine this is going to be an ongoing situation. So there might be some kind of global resolution where the government steps in and says, you need some attention here because you're not a great mom. And so that's certainly something that I would anticipate they're going to do, put together a global deal with the criminal charge and intervention by child services.
John Day, thank you so much for taking the time. Always love having you on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll see you next time.